I am very excited to introduce our speaker this evening, Joanna Wu. Joanna is a PhD student in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at UCLA, studying female birds. She previously worked at the National Audubon Society and is a member of the Galbatross Project, which is a group of birders, scientists, writers, and conservationists who are passionate about spreading awareness about female birds. So Joanna, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that and what you have to share about female birds. So thanks so much for joining us, and I will hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Serena, and thank you everyone for being here this evening. So as Serena said, I'm going to talk about the most overlooked birds in North America, females. And first of all, I want to shout out to the Galbatross Project, which I'll tell you more about. I want to thank the Female Birdsong Project for partially inspiring my work and the work that we do with Galbatrosses, writers like Ken Kaufman and many others, as I'm certainly not the first one to notice that female birds aren't getting the attention that they deserve. And finally, thanks to Serena and the FFBBO for having me here. It's very special for me to talk to this group because I'm from Mountain View and I moved to LA from San Francisco. So I loved hearing about the observations that you guys have been seeing, and especially the snowy owls, or sorry, snowy plover. I miss seeing them on the beaches there. Okay, so I'm gonna today talk about roughly these topics of why female birds, female bird day, what that is, and some tips for identification. I am certain that many of you are better birders than me, but I hope that even the most expert birders of you can walk away with something, one new fact that you learned about female birds here. And then, yeah, even though there's some tips, it's going to be hard to ID female birds, and sometimes it may not be possible. And then I'm going to end by talking about female bird song a little bit. So, why female birds? Why pay particular attention to them in the first place? Well, I went and I Googled birds, just bird. And these are some of the first photos that came up in the search. This beautiful Baltimore Oriole, a striking blue jay, and a scarlet tanager. And if we notice one thing, they're all just really striking colors. As humans, we're visual creatures and we're drawn to bright colors. And another thing that as a West Coast birder, I always notice that there's a big East Coast bias. Things like blue jays and cardinals get a lot of credit, and that doesn't even resonate with us on the West Coast here. And these are all males, right? They're just bright, and a lot of males are like that. This is one of the times I'd like the audience to type in the chat. What's the ID of this bird? Does anyone have a guess on this species ID? Yeah, somebody guessed tanager. Anyone else? Okay, I'm gonna move on. It is indeed a scarlet tanager. I couldn't tell if it was a Western or a scarlet because I mean, these traits are pretty subtle, but yeah, just as much as the red bird, this is also a scarlet tanager, but we just focus so little on the female version of this bird, even though it's half the species. I'm going to be using these terms a lot, dimorphic and monomorphic, just as a refresher for anyone who's not familiar. Dimorphic is when two sexes in the same species look different. This is the top picture is an Eclectus parrot. And I love this story because when they first try to captive breed them, they put the red birds with the red birds in the zoo and the green birds with the green birds because the zookeepers thought they were two separate species. But in fact, this is a male-female pair. The female is red and the male is green. She defends territories in the rainforest, and she has multiple mates that are green, and he goes around and forages and is camouflage and brings food to the chicks that way. And then my personal favorite species, California quail, is also a dimorphic species. In contrast, we have birds that are monomorphic, same morph. Adult black crowned night herons look the same across sexes, and juveniles, of course, look different from the adults. And I should say that in North America, we have a number of species in the top row there where the males are brighter than the females. But in the tropics, it doesn't tend to be the case. For the three species in the bottom row, which are tropical, males and females look the same as each other. So there's no dimorphism there. And it might be because tropical species, both mates of a pair defend year-round territories, whereas in North America, birds come up here to breed, and so the males kind of defend the territories a little more. So there's definitely a difference, and I just want to kind of challenge the assumption that we have, being North American bias, that we think males are generally the brighter of the species. And of course, we have birds like phalaropes, where, has anyone ever seen the red-necked or red phalarope in their breeding plumage? I've only seen the winter one myself, but I would love to see one of these in their shiny breeding plumages. And it's a system where females have multiple mates, and she is the brighter one of the two sexes. In general, overall, I learned that that there is quite a bit of variety in mating systems and across the world, across phylogenies, with sandpipers being one of the cases where females tend to have multiple mates. So this bias for, again, maybe toward brighter members of the sex extends to photography and art. We always see pictures of male Anna's hummingbirds, which are very beautiful and amazing, and male cardinals, especially for Christmas time. And in cases like naming, this bird here is the blue grosbeak, but there's nothing blue about her. And then we have the classic red-winged blackbird, whose name aptly works for the male, but the female on the top there is also a red-winged blackbird, and that's a good one where birders confuse it for a sparrow, oftentimes, because she just looks streaked. So it goes across to naming. And this is just a funny little quote. Like other ladies, the little feathered brides have to bear their husbands' names, however inappropriate. What injustice! Here an innocent creature with an olive green back and yellowish breast has to go about her days known as a black-throated blue warbler, just because that happens to describe the dress of her spouse. Right, so yeah, I think that sums it up very well. This bias toward male birds extends to bird watching as well. And I encourage you all to read this article by field guide author Ken Kaufman, who wrote that he became a better birder when he stopped focusing on the males. And he starts this essay with a story about this birder who would only add a bird to the life list if he saw the male of that bird. When I think about it, it really doesn't make sense, because females are half of that species. So, why would you go out of your way to only focus on the males? And for me, as a scientist, the reason I went back to get my PhD was because I learned that only focusing on, or disproportionately focusing on males can have conservation implications. Here we have a female and male golden-winged warbler, and what's happening is that in their wintering habitats in Central America, females use lower elevation forests than males do, because males are dominant in this species and they exclude females from the better habitats in the winter. And these habitats, because the secondary forests that the females are using are easier to access, they were logged at a rate that's twice as high as the habitats that were disproportionately used by males. So female birds are actually incurring a greater rate of habitat loss because of their tendencies to segregate. And it's really dangerous to go out and survey for birds. If you're only surveying for the males, you might be missing areas where females are using, if this is the case for more species. Here is another example where birds segregate in the non-breeding season. This is actually quite common for warblers, as I learned from the literature, in birds like the black and white warbler and American redstart. So in the black and white warbler, you can This figure is showing that there's a higher percentage of males that use canopy and mid canopy, and a higher percentage of females that use the understory, so the lower parts, whether you're talking about a mangrove forest or a scrubbier type of tree. Again, that's due to dominance. An example out from the ocean is that the wandering albatross, females tend to forage farther closer to the poles, and males forage farther south. This is a southern hemisphere species. And the first paper found that female albatrosses were actually caught in long line fishing lines more than males because there's more fishing efforts going on in those near tropical areas. However, this doesn't seem to be the case across albatrosses, since the second paper here in Ecology and Evolution found no difference in bycatch rates between the sexes. So it seems it's a little bit of a nuanced pattern in this case. And then in some extreme examples, there's ground burrow nesting birds that where only the female nests, and then you have a flood event that's related to climate change, and it can cause direct mortality to the incubating bird. So I'm really interested to understand, like, how are the sexes potentially differently affected by climate change? One aspect in science that's better studied is regards to migration timing and whether there's synchrony or asynchrony in migration timing as climate change occurs. So currently in North America, across several hundred migratory species, male birds tend to arrive in spring a little bit earlier and set up their territories, followed by females. And you would expect that with climate change, with temperatures, with spring advancing earlier, that both curves would shift so that males and females arrive earlier. But what my colleagues have found is that males are indeed shifting their arrival times earlier, but females tend to arrive at the same time as before. So there's actually quite a bit of asynchrony between the arrival times of male and females. An example is in the yellow warbler. And what does this mean? Well, we don't know yet, but it's very interesting to think about it. And this wouldn't have happened if they didn't consider males and females separately. So it's important to sometimes to think about the sexes as kind of separate populations rather than lump them. But this is easier said than done. There is great scientific bias in how data are collected. For example, do people here use eBird? I imagine that that you might, but basically in eBird on the mobile app, you can enter in a number of breeding codes like flyover, singing male, multiple singing males, but there's not even a place on your app to enter in the sex of the species that you're seeing. So automatically this data is hard to collect by design. There's a ton of people use eBird, and certainly in our lab, we use eBird to analyze data quite a bit, but sex-specific data is just hard to get. I've written to eBird and spoken to them at conferences multiple times, and I asked them just to put this simple feature into their app. You can enter in sex data on the computer if you use the computer to do checklists, but increasingly people are using it on their phones. So if you can do me a favor, if this talk has inspired you, please write to Cornell and ask for a feature request to be able to enter the sex and age of birds in your app. Because if you can say there's physiological evidence or carrying nest material, I think you should be able to put in a field that determines something for as basic as the sex of the bird. Okay, so another thing is that museum collections are male biased. This probably doesn't come as a surprise to you, but it's true in both birds and mammal specimens. And another issue with science is that our survey methods tend to be male biased. When I started this work, I used to say that female birds are harder to detect, but I read a paper that said that it's actually the methods that are male biased. When we do playbacks, we tend to catch the males more that are coming in to defend territories. or when we do misnetting, it's a male bias method, misnetting during the breeding season, since females move around less. So when people do things like targeted nest surveys of swallows, they actually tend to catch more females than males that way. So I think I would love to see a movement in science trending toward equal collection of the sexes, equal surveying. Okay, this brings me to Female Bird Day and the Galbatross Project, and why did we start this project? So I am part of a group of 5 people, and we call ourselves the Galbatrosses. It was established by my colleagues in 2019. And yeah, like Serena said, we are here to basically educate people and to talk about the importance of female birds. So Female Bird Day was over the Memorial Day weekend, and I love seeing all the female birds that you guys have seen. If you can help enter them into eBird checklist, maybe you already have, go ahead and go to the web browser and add sex information. All those data are useful for scientists in the future. But yeah, one of the things we do is promote Female Bird Day and to promote people to go out and search for female birds. We also try to share tips about how do you identify female birds, and we ask people to share those tips with us, and we've learned a lot from just mostly working with folks on Twitter and other social media platforms. And with that, I'd like to share with you all some identification tips for female birds. So I talked about dimorphism. The most obvious way of dimorphism is that they can be visibly different. So in a northern flicker, only the male has a black moustachial stripe pattern. It's pretty subtle, but look for it, and it's not too hard to find. Of course, you have the very obvious ones like adult male housefinch and a female or immature housefinch. In this case, you might want to use timing as a clue, because if you see a brown individual in the summer or fall, it could very well be an immature that was born that year. But if you see the adult individual in late spring, like in May or April, it's likely to be a female adult. This is from my title slide. The female belted kingfisher is the one for which the bird is named after, which is very rare in the birding world. So for the rusty belt that she has across her chest, and the male is very beautiful in his own way as well. Apparently, European starlings are sexually dimorphic. Females have a little bit of a pinkish tinge at the base of their bill, and males have more gray at the base of the bill. This is very subtle and hard to identify, but they come close often. So try that out. See if you can tell female starlings apart. Here is a case where a bird is dimorphic in size. The female American kestrel is in the back in this photo, but you can even tell that she's a little bit bigger than the male. So this is the species where females are dominant and larger. Who can give me the ID of the bird on the left here? This raptor on the left. Just go ahead and type it in the chat if you have a guess. This is a potentially tricky one for sure. But yeah, I want to talk about how the relative size comes into play, because the female of this species is bigger than the male. And she's actually molting too into her adult plumage. So this seems to be a female, a younger female, I don't know the exact year, molting into her adult plumage and an adult male. Let me just look at the chat. Oh yeah, you guys are on it. Great. Cooper's hops. Yes, excellent. Yeah, I have a hard time with male Coopers versus female sharp-shinned, but this Cooper's has a nice rounded tail. Okay, and the bird on the right is the great horned owl, and I don't typically see females being that much bigger, but this picture is just an extreme example, I guess. But I want to share with you guys the hoot calls of the great horned owl, because females have a higher pitched call than males do, and they'll often duet with each other. Let's try and see if you can listen for that next time you hear them. So I'm going to play that here. So yeah, the female starts out by hooting. She has a higher pitched call than the male. Another way of being dimorphic is that birds can actually be behaviorally dimorphic. In swallows, for some reason, only the female does nest sanitation. So it's like kind of like a little diaper where parents take out a fecal sac, cleaning up after their kids. And in this species, only the female does it. So this nest is a chestnut-back chickadee in my previous place in San Francisco. In this species, only the females incubate, although that in many species, both males and females incubate. So this is just such a crazy photo of a number of ducklings that all started to follow this one merganser. They're not all herd ducks, but they kind of imprint. In this species, in ducks, females tend to do the caring for the young, but there are many, but across the avian phylogeny, it's the role of caring for young is balanced across males and females. But yeah, overall, it's extremely hard to identify male and female birds sometimes. Supposedly, male mourning doves have a brighter blue cere and darker spots on their back, but unless they're very close to you and in like some kind of correct lighting, it can be really hard to tell them apart. I can't tell you in this image which one is male and female. Okay, this is a fun quiz for you all, as with our resident acorn woodpecker here. Which bird is the female? Can people type in the chat whether it's the left one, which is this one, or the right bird? Which one is the female acorn woodpecker? Oh yeah, a lot of great participation here. Right, so most of you guessed correctly without me giving you any more clues, but yes, the bird on the right is the female. Males have a little more red crown, and the female has a black patch separating the white from the red on their heads. So look for that in an acorn woodpecker. I can tell you that I've seen hundreds of them without knowing that they were dimorphic. So this is a fun little trait for sure. Here is another quiz. I love this image of the downy and hairy woodpecker side by side. And then on the right, we have a female, but what species is she? It's handy when they stand next to each other like that. So yeah, what's the species of the female woodpecker on the right there? People are guessing hairy. I think that the answer was downy because the bill to head ratio is smaller. Yeah, I believe that's what it was. But yeah, it's hard to tell. But yeah, so yeah, if they don't, for this downy hairy, if they don't have a red spot, then it's a female. There's some really subtle ones with cedar waxwings males. This is a male on the left, has a dark throat patch, whereas females' throat patch is just like a little grayish under the bill. It doesn't extend to their throat and the top of their breast, but the males kind of extends further. A fun little tip there. Okay, this is one of my favorite facts about female birds, but they did a bunch of genetic sampling of black oyster catchers and found that females, the ones with the eye spots, are like 92% of the time female, whereas the one with the clear pupil is a male. This is just a wild trait that is so subtle, but yeah, try next time if you see these, then first of all, you're lucky. These are really cool birds, I think. And the females have a little speck of pigment outside of the pupil. Nobody really knows why. Maybe it's their way of telling each other apart. And this is also the case for American oyster catchers, but not for all oyster catchers in the world. Here is another equally wild trait. Do you guys notice that the bill of the two avocets are different? So they're not dimorphic in plumage. They can both have the orange back, but the male American avocet has a straighter, longer bill, and the female has a more decurved and shorter bill. So the female avocet is actually the one on top, and the male is the one in the bottom, in the foreground there, with a fine difference in bill morphology. This is thought to maybe segregate them slightly from the types of resources that they use in foraging. Pretty wild. And then we have birds like our lovely Anna's hummingbird, with the in which case both males and females can have the throat gorget iridescent patch. I read that females never have the iridescent pink on their foreheads, so males have that, but this individual could be a young male. Just kind of depends on whether they've bred or not by the time you've seen this individual. And then I downloaded these images. One was labeled female, one was labeled male. And I really can't tell you which one is which, because during the fall, when you have a warbler like this, it could be a young male that just hasn't molted into his alternate plumage yet. So sometimes it's just impossible to tell, and that's okay. That applies to birds like the American coot as well. Okay, I want to share another one of my favorite traits for a fun backyard species, the wren-tit. So we know that the wren-tit has a song that trills downward like a ping pong ball. So male songs accelerate and speed up toward the end, whereas the female just kind of goes pit, 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 pit. So let me try the female song first. Okay, so it just kind of keeps going pit, 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 pit. It does get a little bit faster, but listen to the males. So the males kind of accelerate to the point of a trill, whereas females end in distinct pit notes. Yeah, next time you're out for a walk in the chaparral, listen for male and female wren-tits, which wren-tits are have some of the shortest migration. They're like incredibly residential, non-mobile species. And so both pairs defend territories and both sing constantly. Slide here. You can have a bird like that where only the males sing, such as a Wilson's warbler. So if you hear this bird singing, then it's a male. But this leads me to transition to tell you about the really cool female birdsong project, because like you might be suspecting, I'm going to tell you that female birds sing a lot as well. In fact, of the birds which we have sex-specific song information about, which is about 27% of them, in 2/3 of those species, researchers found that females actually do sing, not only the males. And at least 150 North American species have known female bird song. If you go to this paper in 2018 by Karen Odom and Lauren Benedict, and I can share this out if it's helpful, it has a nice supplementary table of all the birds that do have a female bird song. That includes things like song sparrow, famously canyon wrens. Canyon wrens have a very different female song from the male song, and I heard that last weekend, so that was really nice. And yeah, female birds have a lot of song as well. And in fact, it seems to be ancestral, which means that it was the kind of the ancestral state of in a lot of bird phylogeny groups for females to have song, and it seems to have been lost in the in the northern temperate regions as birds colonize the northern hemisphere. In this figure, the red dots are species where female birdsong is present, and the blue dots are species where female birdsong is absent. A number of bird of paradise species don't have female birdsong, which makes sense because the males do all this elaborate display and females do all the chick rearing. So that's a very classic case of a skewed breeding system. But in a lot of these other species, wood swallows, cuckoo shrikes, these old world, more ancestral species, both males and females sort of, have similar roles in territorial defense and chick rearing and so forth. Okay, I'm going to transition a little bit and talk about some fun projects we've been able to do as albatrosses. So I worked at the National Audubon and I was looking for photos in our very large bird database, and I just had the hardest time finding photos of female birds. And I made an offhanded comment to our director of photography saying like, oh yeah, the database is great, but we just barely have any photos of female birds. And the next year, she started a prize called the Female Bird Prize to encourage folks to go out and take photos of female birds and to not, only focus on males in photography. Like I said, humans are visual creatures and we're drawn to bright birds and bright subjects. But, the idea, the goal of this prize is to encourage people to appreciate the subtle and to bird the challenge, basically. So we started this Female Bird Prize in 2021. And our inaugural winner was Elizabeth Yicheng Shen. I think she's actually from either Fremont or San Jose or something, but in the Bay Area with this amazing image of northern harrier. Oh, right. So me and the other albatrosses participated as judges, and we just had such an amazing time looking through photos of female birds and justifications of how people were able to identify them as female. So just an amazing opportunity to understand things from a photographer's perspective. So not only is this bird a female because the male has a gray plumage that's very different looking, but in harriers, the eye color is different from juveniles and adults. So adults have a lemon yellow eye, and juveniles have like brown to dark red colored eyes. So we were able to ultimately identify this to be a juvenile female northern harrier. And I think they can have this eye color for 1 or maybe 2 years of their lives. Really neat, just incredible the amount of information you can get by looking closer within the species level. And last year, we worked together again, looked through a couple hundred images and selected the greater sage grouse as the winner. This photo was taken, I don't know, I can't remember, something like minus 40-degree weather in the dawn light. And we have so many photos of beautiful male sage grouse displaying that it's nice to have a reminder of who they're displaying for. And we're doing the judging again this year, and the prizes will be revealed soon. I'm nearing the end of my talk, and I want to share that a couple of takeaways is that female birds are not just like males. They often use different habitats, have different life histories, do different things. But unfortunately, they do tend to be underappreciated on average. I encourage you to bird the challenge and learn about female birds. And I guarantee you it'll make you a better birder because you'll be looking for things like bill shape and head shape in species that are hard to tell females apart from one species from females of another species. And for my research, for my PhD research, I'm really interested in understanding how else are males and females different. I've been reading a lot that survival rates are different between sexes in birds, just as it is in mammals. In mammals, females tend to live longer and have longer lifespans. But the trend is actually the opposite across a number of bird families, such that male birds have longer lifespans and higher annual survival rates than female birds. So I'm trying to understand, what does this mean for population, and maybe see if there's any reasons on why that is. And I'm really curious to know, like I already mentioned, if climate change could impact males and females within a species differently. And I think it's important to consider the data separately so we don't miss any signals that might be different between the sexes. So please join us. Use the hashtag female birds or hashtag albatross project when you go out and go female bird watching. And share, tag one of us on Twitter if you have, or tag me, I guess. I'll share my Twitter handle in a minute. If you notice a new female bird trait, and where the albatrosses are collecting data on what traits there are in hopes of making a database that people can access in the future. By the way, another fact, I couldn't help myself, but in the bush tit, they are also sexually dimorphic. Yeah, so the eye color in male and female bush tits are actually different. So go ahead and look for that as well when you see your next 20 bush tits. Okay, well, with that takes me to the end of my talk. I want to thank you very much for your attention and bearing with me during dinner time. Here is my Twitter handle, so feel free to tag me if with your next female bird observation. And I'll take any questions now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joanna. That was so interesting, and it was so much fun to see the different traits that you can point out for identifying females, some of which are really subtle and probably not a whole lot of people know about them. So thanks for pointing that out, and also highlighting how there are all these conservation implications as well, and that you're doing work to further study these female birds, and so I think that's great. So thank you so much for this great talk and for sharing all of that. I thought it was really wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and look through for some questions here. And I know that when you were playing the owl calls, the great horned owl calls, we had someone ask if that rasp in the background was also the female great horned owl or not, if you recall.
Oh yeah, I remember the rasp, but I actually don't know if it's female specific or not. So you might have to look that up on a different source. But if for those of you who are in the East Coast, there's like a rattle scrowl kind of call that blue jay females make. I haven't heard it because I live here, but yeah, that's a crazy fun fact.
Oh, okay. Fun. Yeah, I'm sure that that'll be something that our more Eastern friends can look up for the blue jay. It's a good one. And then let's see. So, I do see a question here. Do female songs ever change after the young have fledged?
After the young have fledged.
So I guess that's the adult female, if their songs ever change after. I think that's the question. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but if the female songs ever change after their babies have left the nest, I guess.
That's a good question. I don't know. For migratory species, females often can leave, not too long after the young have fledged. So I don't know if they'll continue staying around and singing. And for resident species, like in the tropics, I know more about, oftentimes pairs stay on the same territory over time. And I don't think that their call changes with regard to the fledgling status too much. So I think it's more of a difference between year-round residents, like the neotropics versus northern hemisphere.
Yeah. Then we had a couple of comments here about molt timing can be different, and that females are often killed while incubating, which maybe is one of the reasons why males might in many cases have longer average lifespans. So I don't know if there's anything you want to chime in about those?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a couple main theories for why males have longer lifespans. One of them is reproductive cost. And another one is that females disperse more as juveniles. And we know that mortality for juvenile birds is a lot higher because they're just less experienced. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then we had a question so you mentioned how the bills of the European starlings are subtly different between the males and the females. Do you know if there's anything also related to maybe the bill color in juvenile European starlings?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I would start with Birds of the World or other sources. I'm sure there's a
Okay.
lot on starlings. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, given how ubiquitous they are in so many places. Oh, let's see. This is a comment. Probably much greater difference in mortality in species with little or no male incubation, as with Lecking or incredibly endangered kakapo parrot in New Zealand. Also male vocalization in kakapo due to their Lecking booms and chucks. Oh, but are other parrots more equal in female vocalization?
Are parents more equal in female localization? Oh, there is a paper that kind of looks a little bit at breeding roles across phylogeny groups, but I don't know if they looked at songs. And I'm not sure exactly about parrots and localization, how that differs between sexes. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's a whole world of birds out there where I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a lot to be discovered and and it's just so variable. Oh, and then we have a question here. Can you please explain more about how the differences in vertical habitation between sexes leads to conservation concerns? So yeah,
Oh,
that's
okay.
something you mentioned. And so if you can expand on that a little bit, I think that would be great.
Yeah, sure. The one I mentioned about the golden wing warblers, males use higher elevation forests that are like, I don't know, some number of meters higher on average than the female forests, than the forests that females use more. And so just because of ease of accessibility due to logging roads being closer to lower elevations, the lower elevation sites were getting logged more, and that happens to be where the females were. So these scientists were saying females are disproportionately affected. In terms of the other warbler segregation paper about low and high understory, I don't know. I don't think that one had a specific particular conservation implication. It's just that males are dominant and tend to prefer higher forest canopy levels, which have more food or resources that they prefer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense that with these females occupying lower elevation areas, that's more sensitive, I guess, to disturbance by humans, just because we can more easily access that. So it's an interesting conservation implication for sure. Yeah. And then let's see. Oh, well, we had someone share that they noticed a new call from the female black-headed grosbeak as breeding season gets into full swing. So that's interesting.
Oh,
That's
thank
something
you.
they
I'm going to
can,
make a note.
yeah. And then we have another question here. Do some species have similar male and female songs like the wren tit, and or are many completely different? Are contact calls the same generally? A few questions there.
Yeah, those are great questions. And I'll send Serena the paper, the 2018 paper that has that appendix that has a lot of information about this. Another thing you can do is go on the Macaulay Library. You can filter songs by sex. And so I've tried to get a lot of my recordings that way. I I I do it does seem like generally male and female songs are related, like the wren tit or Greek horned owl, where they're kind of like variations of each other. Same with the canyon wren, the female one, the male has that descending trill that people might be familiar with, and the female has a little bit of a different call that kind of goes upward. So that's more different, more distinct from each other. Yeah, and context calls, that's a great one. And I think that hasn't been studied enough to know if they're the same generally. But yeah, there's a variation with songs. And yeah, great question with the contact calls. I don't know.
Yeah, very interesting. Something that could be a cool area of future research.
Mhm.
And then we had a question about if you know if there are any visible differences in male and female towhees. And I don't know if they're referring to California or spotted or maybe one further out, but they're seeing one playing on the patio now. So
That's
do you know if
awesome.
any of them are sexually dimorphic?
Not the Kaltoes. And they are a, a species that has a very small territory, and they're quite territorial, so they'll fight off neighboring California towhees. You can probably see that. I do in my yard. But if you are talking about spotted towhees, yeah, the males are like jet black and the females are browner.
And then one comment here is, I learned at one point that in mammals, it's often males who leave their natal area and disperse, whereas in birds, it's usually the female. Could that be a major reason for the disparate longevities of males and females? So you did touch on that, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, and that's true. Like male lions will need to disperse and find his own kind of group. So that's definitely a theory that's out in science for sure.
Nice. And then do you have any recommendations for books for perhaps identifying female birds?
Not yet. That's something that one of the albatrosses wanted to do in the future, but we're probably a number of years from an actual book. But yeah, I
Okay.
mean, Sibley's pretty good, and I use Birds of the World a lot, which I know not everyone might have a subscription to, but yeah, the information's kind of out there. It's just in the scientific literature, so it's not well collated.
Mhm.
Oh,
Well, maybe.
actually, sorry, I will recommend, if for the people who are not afraid to dive into really technical stuff, there's Peter Pyle's guide to molts, and that has a ton of information about identification in there that can help with the sexes, but it's incredibly technical.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, well, maybe something will come out in the future, not any like super near future, but it'll be something to look out for down the line. Okay, any differences, any different responses to your project from male versus female colleagues? Yeah, do you have any experience just on how male versus female colleagues might be responding to these kinds of questions about female birds?
That's a great question. That's more about the sociology of humans, which is totally appropriate. And I think I don't have enough data points because I've only presented this work at like one or two conferences, but generally, males, men and women scientists are all like, huh, I didn't really think of that. That's cool. So I generally get positive feedback from both. But from women, I tend to get additional feedback that, like, oh, this is so cool. I love that you're doing this and thinking of the girls, like kind of like a comment about that. So yeah, yeah, mm, mm, everyone's positive in general. Yeah.
Which is great. I'm glad to hear that.
Mhm.
And then another question is, what counts as song in corvids?
Hmm. Um, I I don't know. I think there's a number of species, and corvids and like jays and crows are part of that don't necessarily have a something that's like particularly different between songs and calls because they can do so many vocalizations. So it's a little bit like the term song has been questioned in the scientific literature in general recently, because it's supposed to be something sung to attract mates, but or to defend the territory, but there are variations of calls like corvids do that um, also serve that function that aren't as elaborate as songs, and songs should be learned as well rather than innate. And corvids certainly have the capacity to learn songs, even to mimic calls of others, if you've heard the Steller's jay. So I think that's a fuzzy area of active research.
Yeah, good to know. Yeah, definitely something that can be a little ambiguous at times.
Mhm.
And then, well, I guess I'm going to go back to this, but going back to like thinking about the difference between male and female mammals versus birds and their longevity. There was just a thought that, don't female mammals also incur a higher reproductive cost? So, why is it potentially different between mammals and birds?
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad this question was kind of revisited because yeah, that is like, whoa, what women or female mammals give birth, but and sometimes are the sole caregivers, but also tend to live longer than males. There's some cost to um, defending territories that happens in mammals more than with birds. Birds actually are more monogamous than mammals on the whole. And partly because it takes both parents to successfully raise a clutch, whereas for mammals, for some reason, it's more successful for just the females to rear a clutch. So there's higher fighting costs that the men have time to spend time on. And then some people might know this, but in mammals, females have the XY chromosome, but in birds, that's flipped, so that female birds are homozygous, meaning they have two like ZZ chromosomes, whereas the male has the ZX chromosome or ZW, depending on who's talking. And if you remember from high school biology, people suspect that when you have two different copies of the sex chromosome, you can mask out some deleterious effects. So some people theorize that because female birds have two copies, two homologs, they don't have as much like genetic kind of strength maybe as female mammals, because female mammals are heterozygotes. So those are the three main theories. There's always like counterfactuals and cases that go the other way, but those are the three prevailing theories right now.
All right, well, thank you. And then there were just a couple of great comments here that the talk gave people something new to focus on. So thank you for that. And also that one person said that they loved that you noted some females being more subtle coloring versus using the more commonly used term drab, which is has a little bit of a negative connotation. So just to note that language matters so much. So yeah, thank you so much. Lots of thank yous in the chat here. So I thought that was really, really interesting. So as you can see, there were so many wonderful questions. So I just, again, want to thank you so much, Joanna, for this great talk and for being with us tonight. I think you've given people a lot of things to think about, especially moving forward, and appreciating female birds, and also some things they can do to hopefully like promote a better scientific understanding by contacting you, sharing observations, and also hopefully getting in touch with Cornell and adding those details to their checklists. So I just wanted to ask you, Joanna, if there are any last things you want to share with the audience before we sign off?
No, that's everything. Yeah. Really appreciate your time today and attention and great questions. Thanks for letting me be here.